Good afternoon, sports fans. This is a flight I had today with the Tek-Sumo wing. It was pretty windy out at the field today. Winds would have been up around 20 kilometres an hour and gusting even higher. And the plane was having difficulty in returning to home and maintaining a steady circle around the home position. And this is something that has come up as a discussion topic in the forum for this Autopilot in recent days. So I thought I'd document my experiences today and add them to the mix. I think the manual for this Autopilot describes the return to home behaviour as flying home and then doing a 50-metre circle about the home position, but in my experience this doesn't actually happen. Well, it may happen in ideal windless conditions, but depending on your speed and the wind and the amount of gain that you have set in the model, the actual circle can be a very lopsided ellipse, and that was the case today. So I think the first thing you need to do is sort of manage your expectations. If you're expecting a 50-metre circle every time, regardless of conditions, you're going to be disappointed. So the takeoff went fine. Basically all I did was get up to a reasonable height and then put the plane into return to home mode while I walked back to the base station and watched it on the screen. So I'm up at around about 100 metres, I think I was, and I've just slipped it into return to home mode now, and the model starts flying east, and it goes quite a long way, which isn't unusual for the first time you use return to home. I find it seems to be after it to take a while to think about where home is, and it just done a fairly dramatic turn to come back to home now. You can see it's just to the right of that dam at the bottom of the screen, and it flies home and it starts circling, but it's quite a short circle on the upwind side and a long ellipse on the downwind side. So at the moment I'm flying south, and there's a 20 kilometre an hour wind behind me. Unfortunately the current sensor didn't seem to be working today, so I'm limited by the ground speed indication I've got on the screen. So it turns out that I'm doing about 35 kilometres an hour downwind, and it's dropping to about 15 or lower when I'm going into the wind, which is now. So I'm heading north, the wind's coming directly at me at about 20 kilometres an hour, and I've just dropped down from 35 to 16 kilometres an hour. The altitude's at about 100 metres, and so the plane's going quite slowly, but it's stable, heading towards home. So I'm just about over home now, and it starts to turn, and what happens, the wind gets behind it and it really loses any lift, so the plane's essentially in a stall here. You can see the altitude dropping, the plane's coming down. It's interesting that it's maintaining its 50 metres from home while all this is going on. So I feed in a bit of extra throttle to see how that's going to affect it, and it starts gaining altitude again, but the speed isn't really going up, so it's really in a powered stall. But I was quite impressed with the fact that the stabiliser is managing to keep the wings level. So you can see the speed is really not flying speed, but the altitude's going up. I'm doing nothing except mucking around a little bit with the throttle. I've decided I'll leave it in return to home mode just to see what it will do. I'm flying line of sight, so I had my finger on the mode switch if I needed to. But you see, once it gets back to its original altitude of over 100 metres, it gets its act together, and then builds the airspeed up and starts to do its circle. But as you can see, on the downwind side it's 350 going on for 400 metres from home before it actually turns back towards home, which it's doing now. And it flies home. So it's going into the wind now. So I've still got the throttle fairly high, as you can see that it's maintaining the speed now. And it's turning back to the south now, so it's within 50-60 metres of home. It started to turn on the upwind side, so heading downwind now, so the speed's picking up. The wind's directly behind it, and it doesn't really start turning back till about now, which is once again about 300 metres from home. So it's doing a fairly big ellipse, and but it's doing it quite stable. So long as the speed's up, there isn't a problem. It's just the difference in upwind speed and downwind speed affects the diameter of the circle that it's doing. But at no stage am I worried that it's going a long way, but I'm not worried that it's not going to turn at all. Once it settles into this home circling mode, it just seems to make up its own mind what the path's going to be, and the path will be dictated by how the wind's blowing and how much throttle speed you've actually got. So once I had given it enough throttle to handle the conditions, it was maintaining a pretty consistent elliptical path around home. I mean, home wasn't in the centre of the path. Home was much closer to the upwind end, but it was consistently going round, and it never looked like flying off in any other direction. So I basically took it out of return to home and put it in stabilise, and just did a few lowish sort of circuits just to keep my hand in before bringing the model down. And I've turned my gains down on the stabiliser quite a bit, and it's handling a lot better even in these windy conditions. It was giving me pretty good level of control. I was happy enough to fly fairly low over the creek here despite the wind, and I wasn't getting the jerky responses that I was with the aileron gains set higher. So all in all, pretty happy with the flight, and yeah, quite interesting to see how the return to home works in that situation where it had a lot of wind and not enough throttle. It performed really quite well. So I guess the thing that you've got to expect with this is the more throttle that you give it, the wider that return to home circle is going to be, and the more wind there is, the less round that circle is going to be. And I think that's just a fact that you've got to accept about the Autopilot. I mean, it's a pretty cheap unit. It hasn't got anywhere near the level of sophistication of a lot of the more expensive units, but I was really impressed that it kept the plane level when it clearly didn't have enough throttle, and it focused on getting that altitude back before it got back to doing its major circle. So I guess the key thing here is you can't expect the Autopilot to perform exactly the same under all conditions. It's going to vary depending on how fast you're going, what the wind speed is in your individual plane setup. And just because it's flying further away than you think it should be before it turns to home doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to. So it might be worth your while just letting it go that little bit further and seeing if it comes back before you intervene.